Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskaram. Welcome to another lecture on Pagati, Vesham and Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu. Pagati Vesham is one of the folk dance drama traditions from the Andhra region, which is almost extinct now. You very rarely see Pagati Veshadharlu in the Andhra region now. But at a certain point of time, Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu embraced the Pagati Vesham for some financial and social reasons, and how Pagati Vesham played a very prominent role in the Kuchipudi dance drama tradition. Who are the famous personalities from the Kuchipudi traditional families who were well known for their Pagati Vesham? And what are the Pagati Veshams that the Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu have donned? We'll get into the history of this. Well, Vesham means donning a costume and makeup that hides the real person. In Telugu, Vesham means that you are wearing a costume and a makeup in which who you are will not be immediately known. And what is Pagati? In Telugu, Pagalu means morning. So Pagati Vesham means daytime enactment. Unlike the other dance drama traditions in those days, which used to only happen after the sunset and used to go on until the sunrise. But Pagati Vesham is something which is very different. This used to happen only in the daytime, on the streets and village junctions. And this was a sort of folk tradition. Why? Because the structure of the Pagati Vesham is not very confined to any Shastra as such. And we see Pagati Veshams originating in the Andhra region from the 12th century onwards, or rather the documentation of the Pagati Veshams that are available in the Andhra region are from the 12th century. Does this Pagati Vesham has a name in the Natya Shastra? Yes, it is called as Bahurupa. What is Bahurupa? An actor donning different roles or different characters is Bahurupa, which means the many faces of the many characters that an artist can portray. So the Samskrita term for Pagati Vesham, or which is very similar to Pagati Vesham, is Bahurupa, where an artist dons many characters. As I said, it belongs to the Janapada genre and not the Shastriya genre, because there is no structure to it as such. And usually when you see Pagati Vesham, it is done by a single artist, where they just come in the makeup and the costume of a particular character, recite the dialogues with a certain modulation, and they tell a story. Sometimes they will have another support of an artist who is usually from the musician's troupe, who changes on and off roles for the help of the main artist. The actors of the Pagati Vesham are called as Pagati Veshadharulu or Bahurupulu. The subjects of the Pagati Vesham usually include popular history, folklore, and stories of supernatural elements. Because these are performed on the village streets and junctions and the village squares, the audience usually are from the middle and the lower classes of the strata of the society. The kings and the royals also used to watch Pagati Veshams. We will discuss that later. But usually immediately you start performing a Pagati Vesham on the street or a village junction, you immediately pull in crowd who are masses. So the language is very colloquial that the Pagati Veshadharulu use. They don't use a very high-end Telugu. It's a very colloquial Telugu that they use. Sometimes they use certain words which are very common among the people when they usually talk, so that what they are trying to tell to the masses is easily understood. And regularly the themes are the folklore, which is very popular among the people, and some incidents that are related to history, which are also very popular. And they also talk about the supernatural elements that we usually see in the mythological and the religious stories, usually when performed. They also do that. And very importantly, Pagati Veshadharulu are very much known for the social themes that they undertake. Let's say, for example, there is a problem that the village is facing, or there is a political scenario in which some things are not being okay. So Pagati Veshadharulu, when they do the role, they talk about that social problems that the people are facing or the society is facing. They also talk about certain social conditions. Let's say, suppose there is a disease in the village, there is an epidemic or something that is just spreading very fast. They talk about that. They talk about the measures to be taken to do that. So it's a sort of mass propagation that happens through this one character, that people immediately connect to what the person or the actor is trying to say, and they come in a Vesham which looks very supernatural, very, more than a little more than a human existence. So people are naturally attracted to what this Pagati Veshadharulu are doing. And you won't believe, there were many situations, many incidents in the history rather, where the kings have appointed these Pagati Veshadharulu as spies to know the first-hand information. And there were many a times when the people sought the help of the Pagati Veshadharulu when they used to go to perform in front of the king to tell their plight to the king through their Pagati Vesham. So the Pagati Veshadharulu we can understand as some sort of bridge between the government and the people. And when they used to go as spies, no one used to really doubt anyone, because they were artists who were at the end of the day doing entertainment. But they used to give the kings first-hand information about what is happening in a society, or rather in a house, or rather in a street, because their access to these points is very easy for them. So the Pagati Veshams were extremely famous until we can say around the very early parts of the 20th century. Later, after the early parts of the 20th century, which is 1920s or so, slowly the decline of the Pagati Veshams as a street art form has decreased. But it has stayed in the cinema for a longer period of time, more than it stayed on the street. So we shall see all those in this same lecture. So how did this Pagati Veshams that you see until the early parts of the 20th century get into the Andhra region? Scholars believe that these Pagati Veshams were introduced by one Sri Pallavajjula Venkatramaya Garu, who was a Telugu Brahmin who was very well versed with the theatrical traditions and who migrated from Mysuru to the Andhra region to the Krishna belt and have taught the people of the Gaddipadu Agraharam this Pagati Vesham enactment. This Gaddipadu Agraharam that we are talking about right now is called as Hanumantapuram or Hanumantarayapuram, which is still existing in the Krishna belt, which is very near to the Kuchipudi village. Now the Brahmins of this region, or this village rather, have learnt the Pagati Vesham enactment from Sri Pallavajjula Venkatramaya Garu and were performing it on many occasions in a certain way that it became extremely successful. People were very happy to see a Pagati Vesham as a mode of entertainment, as a sort of information that they would gather, because the Pagati Veshadharulu spoke about the social conditions or sometimes about the supernatural elements or the folklore or the popular history. So it's a sort of a popularity that these Pagati Veshams have gained in the Krishna belt because of the Gaddipadu Agraharam Brahmins. Now, some famous Gaddipadu Agraharam Brahmins who are very well known for their Pagati Vesham are, of course, the Pallavajjula, Srikaram, Kuchi, Kanupuru, Bellankonda, etc. So all these are Kuchipudi neighboring village Gaddipadu Agraharam Brahmins who were very well known for their Pagati Vesha Dharana. Now, imagine two villages which are situated nearby. One is doing the Bhagavatam very well and the other is doing Pagati Vesham very well. It is but natural for these Brahmin communities to get in touch with each other because more so they were into this performative genre. Right. So in the similar way, they formed links, like they became friends, they formed links, and they spoke about their own art forms, how is it performed and all. And there was an interchange of these creative skills or thematic presentations or the way the costumes are worn or the dialogues are recited, how the colloquial language sometimes helps, the people or the masses understand the themes very well. So all these interchange of ideas happened between the Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu and the Gaddipadu Pagati Veshadharulu. Now, Pagati Vesham was usually done by one principal character, and sometimes another artist was needed who did multitasking of many roles and musicians too. This we have discussed in the beginning of the lecture. Usually there is only one Vesham. Now, one thing that you have to understand is that because this is done in the broad daylight, the way the makeup and the costume is also done is little different from usually something that is performed after the sunset. So usually something that is performed after the sunset, usually the makeup and the costumes are more brighter because people those days didn't have the facility of electricity or lights, and so they had to make themselves look more brighter to the audience. But in terms of the daytime enactment, the costumes and the makeup need not be so shiny and brighter because anyway the people can clearly see what the artists are doing. So the costume and the makeup also differs when it is an evening time enactment or a daytime enactment. Pagati Veshagallu also used to go to every house and play a role like theatre at doorstep. So this Pagati Veshadharulu not just getting into the streets and the village squares, but also used to stand in front of the house outside the door and also used to do the Pagati Veshams. It was like a theatre at the doorstep, and this usually they used to do in front of the village head house or the zamindari's house to get patronage from them because financial stability is also very important at any point of time. So Pagati Vesham was more like a theatre at the doorstep also during those days. And another important thing is that because the entire Pagati Vesham is completely based on only one actor who's doing the role, and the actor doesn't have a support of another side actors or any other people to, if he forgets something, then there's no one to just give him back the dialogues. They give their own vocal support. It was extremely important that these Pagati Veshadharulu were very much adept with the language, memorizing the dialogues and knowing the entire plot and theme of the story. So all these things were very important. Of course, there were other Pagati Veshams that were done by other communities who didn't belong to the Brahmin caste. But more so specifically here in terms of Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu that we need to talk, it was the Gaddipadu Agraharam Brahmin Pagati Veshadharulu who sort of had an interchange of ideas and skills between the Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu and In the Brahmin communities of Pagati Veshadharlu, the women did not participate. It was only the men who were completely doing, because in those days it was not okay for the women to get onto the streets and perform, or the village squares and just sing and dance, or just come in front of any doorstep and all. Those days the social conditions were very little different than what it is now. We don't sit here to judge about what it is. The social conditions were like that, so they didn't do it. The social conditions are different now, so we are doing it. That's all. Let us not judge what is right and what is wrong. Now, many Kuchipudi traditional family gurus were famous in Pagati Veshams 150 years ago. Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu also involved dance techniques to their presentation that made it more appealing. When Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu slowly started getting interested into the Pagati Veshams, what did they do? They also started doing the Veshams in their village, in their street squares, and in and around places that they were traveling with their Bhagavata Mela troupe. And what did they do? Because they already were adept with the dancing technique, the Pagati Veshadharlu of the Kuchipudi village also introduced dance into the Pagati Vesham and sort of influenced the Gaddipadu Pagati Veshadharlu also. So it was more sort of a cross-cultural exchange between Pagati Vesham and Kuchipudi Bhagavata Natakam. Now, one question that all of us would have is, the Kuchipudi Bhagavata Mela Nataka already had the Bhama Kalapam and the Golla Kalapam with them. And they were already famous with the Kalapa Prakriya, and they were also doing some Samskrita Yakshaganas with them, and they had their own troops which were famous. Then what was the reason that they did this Pagati Veshams? What is the reason that something that which is very foreign to them since many centuries, why did they do it? Now, one thing that we need to understand in terms of history of the Kuchipudi or any other art form is that during the very last parts of the 19th century, let's say from 1870s or 1880s to the very early parts of the 20th century until 1920s and 30s, this entire 50 years or 60 years of time that was there was a very difficult period for especially art forms survival, because it was one, the theatrical activity, the theatre was, there was an upsurge in the theatre. New theatrical activities have come, and people were not interested to watch these traditional performances, but rather would wanted to watch the social theatre performance, and the ticketed shows were getting houseful those days because it was a very new genre that people were just interested, number one. Number two, new modes of entertainment have also come into picture. And very important number three is that was the exact time when the First World War happened. And during the First World War, it became very difficult for a country like Bharatadesha to actually preserve, propagate, and survive through the art forms. So the artists of Bharatadesha during the First World War really found a lot of difficulties in financial stability, especially the artists, because art was not being sold very well. And the recognition that they wanted for the survival for the next few years was not possible because of the upsurge in theatrical activities, new modes of entertainment, and very importantly because of the First World War. So the Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu sort of, they got a very less recognition, or rather there's a slow decline in the performances that they were doing. People were no more interested in Bhama Kalapam or Gola Kalapam because it was sort of became a little monotonous. Imagine there's a theatrical performance where a new social theme is being performed, and people have seen the Bhama Kalapam many times, Golla Kalapam many times. So usually they think, Acha, Bhama Kalapam is nice, Golla Kalapam is nice, but there is something new that is happening in the theatre. So let's watch that. So even that sort of slow decline of being monotonous also happened. So the Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu thought that it is a time that we need to also look into embracing new avenues of performative aspects, because they had no option beyond Bhama Vesham. And that was the time when the Kuchipudi Yakshagana also, in terms of what Chinta Venkatramaya Garu has done, also didn't start as that of now. So the only options they had were Kuchipudi Bhama Vesham or Gola Kalapam, and no options beyond that. So they have embraced the Pagati Veshams, and they used to also do Pagati Veshams for financial stability, for surviving through this crisis period. And it is not a surprise to know that until 1950s, the Pagati Veshams were very much alive with the Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu. They did a lot of Pagati Veshams during the crisis period, almost until they became extremely busy with the Kuchipudi Yakshaganas that we would discuss later. And even during when they were busy with the Kuchipudi Yakshagana, certain Pagati Veshadharulu also performed a lot. And by 1950s, we see the Pagati Veshams in the Kuchipudi dance fraternity almost extinct. When I say extinct, it's not of that extinct kind of thing. It's like you don't no more see that Vesham in their regular Bhagavata Mela performances. You see many Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu who have moved to Telugu cinema as choreographers and directors using these Pagati Veshams in their films. We'll talk about that when we talk about the Kuchipudi on the celluloid. But as such, in the Yakshagana performances, or exclusively as a Pagati Veshadharlu by the Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu, we just see it extinct by the early parts of the 1950s. And as I said, yes, the Kuchipudi gurus introduced the Pagati Veshams also into the cinema, but that also slowly diminished because there was also a decline in the mythological themes, and more so social themes have come into picture, love stories have come into picture. A day-to-day, every social condition themes have come into picture. Earlier it was only mythological or folklore. So it was very easy for them to include the Pagati Veshams in their stories. But rather, after the social conditions and the social themes in the movies had changed, the Pagati Veshams also slowly started diminishing. And as of now, the only Pagati Vesham that is still alive in the Kuchipudi dance drama tradition is the Ardhanarishwaram that we talk about. So, Ardhanarishwaram is still alive with the Kuchipudi dance drama tradition, which was originally belonging to the Pagati Veshadharulu. The Pagati Veshams came as a stopgap arrangement as interludes for the artist who couldn't fit the classical presentation format. Sometimes what happens, even the young Brahmin boys or men who didn't got adept to the classical technique of presenting a Kuchipudi Yakshaganam, sometimes, it happens. You have to be born with that innate talent to present dance and music. Sometimes, even though you're born in the same family, you wouldn't have that innate talent of music and dance. But what to do? But they belong to that traditional family and they have to be a part of the Yakshagana. So these gurus of Kuchipudi Bhagavata Mela, they smartly used to teach these people who were not adept with the classical mode of presentation into a Pagati Vesham. And they used to make them perform as interludes in between the Kuchipudi Yakshagana, where they used to speak the colloquial language, talk about certain social conditions, or do a Vesham, which is very appealing in between the Kuchipudi Bhagavata Mela Nataka. So this used to happen. Bhagavathulu who were less talented and who couldn't perform the mainstream Bhagavatam also shifted to Pagati Vesham, where they fetched well. There were also certain gurus who were unfortunately not able to make it into the Kuchipudi Bhagavata Mela Nataka. So they very consciously took a decision to sort of get to the Pagati Veshams so that there would be acceptance more for them. because they couldn't fit into the structure of the Kuchipudi Bhagavata Melam or the Bhama or the Golla Kalapam. And their Pagati Veshams got them little more financial stability and popularity in comparison with what they got with the Kuchipudi Bhagavata Mela in terms of the Kalapa Prakriya or those sorts of performances. Now, some of the Pagati Veshams in Kuchipudi that our Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu did were Sharada Vesham, Ardhanarishwara Vesham, Fakir Vesham, Bhetala Vesham, Budabukkala Vesham, Golla Vesham, Somayajula Vesham, Musali Mogudu Vesham, Gayyali Pellam Vesham, Attar Sahib Vesham. So it was more sort of a humorous also sometimes to present Attar Sahibu or Musali Mogudu, which means the old husband, or Gayyali Pellam, which means the wife which is always angry on her husband and is always taunting him. So these Veshams added a sort of humorous element to the presentations, and people really liked it. People really liked the Gayyali Pellam scolding her husband, or the old husband always taunting the wife, and you don't believe when these Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu or Gaddipadu Pagati Veshadharulu, they did Veshams like Fakir Vesham and all. They used to actually speak in Urdu, and they used to recite the hymns from the Quran, which the Muslims seek as an extremely holy book or a text. So they used to also get adept themselves with Urdu language and some sort of Persian body language or the Turkish body language, and they used to by heart the hymns from the Quran, and they used to recite that to make it more, very realistic to the audience. So a lot of hard work has gone into it to entertain the people and to also give first-hand information to the kings, and a lot of financial stability was also established because people really liked watching Pagati Veshams. And of course, to the Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu, very importantly, during the crisis period, they benefited a lot from the Pagati Vesham, and also they gave a lot of their technique and skills also to the Pagati Veshadharulu, which the Pagati Veshadharulu also got benefited from. Now, who are the Kuchipudi Pagati Vesham experts? Peddibotla Dasharatha Ramayya, and he was the first one to create history in the Pagati Vesham in the Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu, and Peddibotla Surayya and Peddibotla Janaki Ramayya. Dasharatha Ramayya, Surayya and Janaki Ramayya were own siblings, brothers, who became extremely famous in their Pagati Veshadharana, who belonged to the traditional Kuchipudi families. And then we have, of course, the very famous Vedantam Parvati Shangaru, who was a great scholar, a great guru who has trained numerous number of students in the Kuchipudi dance drama tradition, and who has also written a text of Bhama Kalapam that is still being used by the Kuchipudi traditional families even today for their performance. Darbha Srinivasulu, Darbha Durgayya, Yeleshwarapu Venkatanarayana, Bhagavathula Kumaraswamy, Pasumarti Seshayya, Pasumarti Chalapati, etc. There are so many other people who were very famous for their Pagati Veshams in Kuchipudi dance drama tradition, and so this is all about the Pagati Veshams and its influence to the Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu, how the interchange of skills happened between Pagati Vesham and Kuchipudi Bhagavathulu, which is a very important part in the history and the development of Kuchipudi dance drama tradition. So until we meet in the next lecture, Namaskaram and thank you.